bye week. It's the bye week for the program, for me. Rough start to the show. This is not a breaking news show. This is the BWI Live Show. So we're off to a hot start. I'm Thomas Frank Carr, Sean Fitz, Nate Bauer. Fitz, save me. How you doing today?
I'm not going to help you there, man. I'm struggling just like you. But we're not talking about a loss, so I'm pretty pumped. So it was good to see you on the post-game show the other day. I enjoyed that. That's my first one this year. Hopefully not my last, but thank you to everyone that joined us. And as you so eloquently mentioned in the chat, we're about 20 subscribers short of 15K. So if you could hit that subscribe button, that'd be very helpful. So thank you to everybody for listening, following along, and get those notifications when we come on your show there.
Yeah, and those notifications are helpful because it's flip season. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. Of course, we did a full video last night with Ryan Snyder about the latest Nittany Lion to join the class of 2025. Nate Bauer is back from California. He was out at the game. Nate, what was your experience traveling out there and your experience at the game?
It's great. I mean, listen, I don't want to bore anyone, but I really like LA. So that's a nice start. There's great food in LA. I got to visit with some friends, and I jammed it all into a 36-hour window because I went out on Friday morning, and my flight home was at 11 o'clock after the game. So I'll be honest,
11 o'clock Pacific time.
11 o'clock p.m. Pacific time. Yes. And so I was back in State College at Elixir Coffee Shop by 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. So it was great. I will say, and I know I said it in the post game instant analysis. And I don't know how much this will resonate with people or if anybody will care, but the Coliseum was great. Like the viewing experience there is great. And just the general vibe, this is in no means meant to be disrespectful to Purdue, but a trip to LA to watch football over West Lafayette. That's a winner.
You're saying Big Ten expansion isn't all downside for everyone.
It's great. I'm saying it's great. So yeah, all about it.
So coming up tonight, because of the bye week, things change around a little bit in Penn State football schedule and practice availability. Our weekly look at their snapshot into what Penn State is doing. That happens tonight and not Wednesday. Of course, we did not have a James Franklin press conference yesterday, so we are in bye week mode. And because of that, that's what we're starting the show today. We're going to be talking. Are you shaking your head, Fitz, at something in the chat, or the fact that I almost said sharding on air?
I actually didn't catch that the first time around. You alerted everyone to saying that.
Yeah, all right.
Encouraging me in the chat, and we got to tap the brakes because he doesn't need that. It's a bye week. There's no game for him to talk about, so all he's going to talk about is himself. And I hated hearing that about the Coliseum because when we were planning this, or when you were planning this trip, I was going to go, and I'm like, all I want to do is see the Coliseum because I'm not a city guy like Nate. I just tag along with him basically, and. Yeah, I'm sorry I missed the Coliseum because it sounded pretty cool.
It's a bucket list item, I think, for a lot of college football fans. But where I was going with that horrible transition is Penn State practices tonight, and I want to get your thoughts on a bye week experience. Generally, these things are more laid back, and we sometimes get a little bit of a longer look into practice because there's more depth players and things like that are going on, and they're not doing actual game prep. So, Nate, what are you interested in learning tonight, if you can learn something from our viewing experience with the Nittany Lions? What's a good bye week barometer check for you?
Look, like who's present and who is not. That's typically a good place to start. I think, look, I'll be honest. I think that, and I dropped this into some of the post-game notes that I had. But at this point, I feel more comfortable sharing on this free platform, but if you haven't already, please subscribe to Blue White Illustrated. That they're banged up, right? Like, I don't think that's like the most insight in the world, but Drew Aller, right? There's some guys that took some shots, and that was a physical game. Penn State is very eager for this bye week because it is coming at a very good time in the sense of how kind of nicked up they are. Bumps and bruises happen to everybody and they happen all year. So that's not changing. But it's just a very timely buy for this team.
Something I think we said, Fitz, on the post-game show, that I didn't think a week 3 bye would be helpful. It was. And this one, we expected they would need a little bit more, at least from a health and a reset standpoint. This one, obviously, in the middle of the season is a good one. So what are your thoughts on practice tonight and what you're looking for?
Yeah, I think this one, I mean, it makes more sense as a typical buy. You just get that extra week in there where you have to put it in somewhere. And, I guess after 2 weeks, I guess that's where it went. So this one's more traditional, and I think it's probably more helpful. I know KJ had the injury for the first bye week, so you work through those issues right there. But now it's just a general, hey, get everybody better, get Drew better, get Nick better, get Anthony Donka, who played essentially with one arm the other day. And
unreal.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to say played well in the sense that like he overwhelmed anybody, but to do that the way that he came off the field the week before, like, is amazing. Like, he had to be hurting on Sunday morning. That flight back was anyway. But no, get those guys healthy, get them squared away, get the younger players out there. This is when you do your actual depth scrimmages. You always have those Sunday practices where you get the younger guys to scrimmage against each other, but there's more of that this week. You're going to see guys in regular numbers and getting more reps with their position groups. When they do this during the season, they split off. They have the D squad and they have the regular squad. You've got to get your work done like with your regular squad, because that's what shows up on Saturdays. But these are the times to get the other guys the reps. We can probably do it later this week, singling out young guys where this is a big week. But you look at the guys that aren't with the travel squad during practice. I mean, like Xavier Gilliam and Max Granville, those guys are all with their position groups, but this is a big week for them. But beyond that, like, I know Malachi Williams has been hurt. You've got on the defensive line, those 3 defensive tackles that we really don't hear anything about because there's not much to hear at this point. Those guys are banged up. And if they're not banged up, they're on the practice squad running the other team's defense. So there's not a ton that you could take out of that, but always look forward to this because you get to see the younger guys. So you see Grunk throw the ball. You want to see Martin and Smith run the ball. Tyser Denmark is obviously a guy that is watched every week that we go. So I think there's an opportunity for guys to sort of get set up for the shine. If you look at what James Franklin said late in camp, it was like, hey, these guys might not help us now, but game 6, 5, what was it, 5 or 6? I think he said
5. He usually says 5, but
yeah, you're 6 games into it. Now all of a sudden you've got the cushion of how many games you know how many games you have to use over the second half of the season. You know what's there in the second half of the season. Unfortunately, Purdue, and you don't like to trash anybody, and they had a strong performance this weekend, but Purdue's a game where you could maybe get some more guys in, but that's a road trip. So you got to take a certain amount of guys for the Big Ten. So I'm rambling. I hear myself, but no, it's very interesting on the small things, which is actually something we cover, especially on BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. So just definitely check that out.
Yeah, and of course, we'll have our practice notes both during what we see while we're out there and then our more formulated, professionally written stuff afterwards, which you can get all if you subscribe to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. The best way to do that is if you subscribe with our dollar deal right now. You missed the special promo. We use promo code PSU1 for our YouTube and podcast listeners. If you've subscribed to the YouTube channel and you're here all the time and you love this stuff, we love that you're here and we want to bring you into that bro hug. We want to bring you a little closer. Get to the site, 2 months for $1. You get to try it out. That takes you into November, into December, recruiting, whatever playoff implications or postseason implications. You'll be a part of the conversation. Then you can decide if you want to make the full commitment at that point. But guys, speaking of a full commitment, did either of you get downtown to Anti-Fragile this week? Fitz, I know that you were planning on making a trip for a good cause this weekend, right? You are muted. Nate, you want to jump in here?
Yeah,
definitely muted. Went out Saturday afternoon. There was a bunch of people down there. I had a cheesesteak, half a cheesesteak, and I brought it home, and then my wife ate the rest of it and said, hey, that's the best cheesesteak I've ever had, which was unexpected, but I mean, she's not getting paid for this. So yeah, that's an advertisement that I like to hear. But no, I went down there, had a couple myself. Of course, $1 from each beer went to hurricane relief. Haven't checked, circled around for numbers, but given the amount of people that were there before the game on Saturday, it's a pretty good showing. So hopefully everything went well there. But yes, that's a spot that I frequent, that Nate frequents. If you were there a couple of weeks ago on Friday, Penn State fans that listen to this podcast, you have started frequenting as well, and we appreciate that. Anti-Fragile on Calder Way is the best beer in town. They've also got kombucha, they've got mixed drinks, they've got cheesesteaks, they've got a lot of what you're looking for if you're in town just to for a visit, or maybe you're a regular. I don't know. But it's always a great spot to stop by. We appreciate their support of this podcast, and we appreciate the support you guys have given them, because it is a two-way street, because we advertise, or they advertise with us, and we are happy to put ourselves into the product because we believe in the product and we support the product. So it's a two-way street. It helps us. It helps them. It helps Downtown State College, which we are very big on going local here, and it doesn't get much more local than Calder Way in State College.
And with that, Nate, I apologize. We do have to get to the next thing. Don't get to get your opinion here on the situation. We're going to get to some big news yesterday in Fitz's recruiting update. We're going to start off with the biggest news from yesterday, which is something you should go check out at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com and here on the YouTube channel after the show. Josh Johnson commits to the Nittany Lions. Ryan and I covered this yesterday on a breaking news video, but Fitz, as always, your insight into these situations is highly valued. So what did you think of this particular decision from Josh Johnson to flip from Louisville to the Nittany Lions?
Yeah, we were a couple months early on this, but this is one we thought would get done back in June. Obviously did not happen that way. It didn't flip to Louisville, went to Louisville, stepped off of that commitment last week, and now he's in the Penn State class. Kind of a swap for Antonio Branch, who flipped to Colorado from Penn State a couple of weeks ago. Penn State was in conversations with Johnson through September, just in case that would happen. It's a guy Penn State's always liked. I mean, it's more of a projection. He's a corner at the high school level, but he's also 6'2", 190. He's probably not going to stay a corner. If he comes in as a corner and moves to safety, I think that's probably the path of, the ideal path for him, because he is a zone corner. He's a cover 3 corner that is going to go back and play a deep safety at some point. So athletic, you look at some of the numbers that he put up in the virtual combine, and that's how he earned his offer. That's how he earned his spot at Penn State. Some of the times on him, public times on him weren't great. I think 11.4 in the 100, but he came out on the virtual combine. They can verify that stuff. He ran a 4.5, had some very good explosive numbers. So I think it's projection. I still think there's a long way to go. I was looking around this morning for some senior film. There's still not much of that out because he started the season hurt, and I would like to see more of that. Just a long athletic kid. They really like him as a couple-year projection. I think this isn't a guy that's going to come into play right away, but one of those guys that you can develop and hopefully takes to the position. As you see, he's active. He's very raw. He hasn't played football very long. He's got some very good genes in terms of running, and I think that makes them feel pretty good about his athletic growth potential, if that makes sense, T. Frank. So he's got some things that are working for him. I think he's still a long-term guy, but at the same time, Penn State's liked him for a long time. They would have taken him the first time around. He didn't commit to Louisville because Penn State decided to go in another direction. He committed to Louisville because he wanted to commit to Louisville. So came back around, a 3-star prospect. We have him as an 89 overall on 3. I think he's a little bit lower elsewhere, but in terms of long-term projection, he's got some athletic upside that is encouraging.
I love safety when you say safety and then you say ... runs a 4.5. The more speed you can have at every level of your defense makes you a game-changing defense. And this versatility that they've been building into the back end, not recently, but just this philosophy of getting big corners, and if they stick at corner, great. If not, you play them at safety, and suddenly you've got a versatile player that can play in the slot, that can play deep, that can play the run, and he seems to have all of those traits put together. Is there anything from the long-term projection and his current ranking? Do you think there's upward mobility for the optics of it? Because I think fans are wrapped in is this going to be a top 10 class, top 15, whatever. They've got a good football player. I think we agree about that internally, but there is that outside projection. So how do you see that optimism of his long-term projection reflected in his final ranking, maybe once we get the season done?
I think given where he's at on his growth chart, which I believe first full year of football was his junior year. So he's still very early. So I think there's a lot to take in from that, but there's probably even more to take in from the senior film. And that's why I want to see the senior film so badly, is because you want to see some sort of growth. You want to see if that step is there mentally in the instincts and things like that. I think the physical stuff, yeah, I'm great with, but it's how do you capture the position for a guy that's only been playing for a couple of years, as well as I do. I mean, there's something to be said for those late risers who just latch onto it, but there's also something to be said for a guy that's been playing the game his whole life and knows instinctually what's going to happen. And that's the question I have with Johnson. Does he have those? Is he able to catch on to that pretty quickly and make it work from that sort of point of view?
Jay has this question here in the chat, and this is kind of what I was getting at. It just a broader conversation. I think he's talking about the class of 2025. Can you talk about how big of a difference it comes to recruiting? USC at 11 and Penn State at 16. And this is kind of the gulf of, I don't know USC's class specifically, but there are a lot of underrated players. And something we talked about in the video yesterday from Owen Alicini where Penn State feels very good about the evaluation, but that might not be how everybody feels about it right now. So is there a disconnect between Penn State's talent in this class, which I think after the last couple of commits and flips, I think Penn State fans should feel really good about, as opposed to the optics of they're still 16th?
So I read the question a little differently in terms of like what's USC do differently. They're at 11th right now. You saw on Saturday the flash, like they have high talent flashing. Like it's undeniably there to me. Like T Frank, I think we said the same thing afterward. This is a team that can probably beat anybody, like because of the talent. And there's always going to be talent at USC. Where it gets sort of, where you ride that roller coaster is all the talent going to be at the skill positions? Is all the talent going to be at quarterback? They got Julian Lewis committed in 2025. Jerome Miles is a receiver. But you go down the list and you go down a while before you find an offensive lineman or defensive lineman. So it's kind of what you saw on Saturday. Like I know that they coached around it. I thought they did a really good job coaching around it. But if you load up on skill guys, and they're terrific on skill guys, always have been. Some of the best players of this millennium, like on offense, have been USC skill guys. Mm-hmm. But it's all about how that transfers to the Big Ten in my mind. And they're kind of on the line right now, even though they have amazing players in that class of 2025. They're ranked 11th nationally, 3rd in the Big Ten. Like that's probably where they should be because they are USC, because the draw of USC in that wide area with so many people should bring in talent. It should bring in, they can, I don't want to say this, but afford to skip on a Darius Dixon, who is right in their backyard because of their USC. Like it's a brand, it's a type thing. I don't know if I can explain that. But how do you build for the Big Ten? You saw Oregon as the best fit for the Big Ten because they were physical up front, and they showed that this week and played a fairly even game with the best in the Big Ten, and got a win over Ohio State. Like, how is USC going to get there? And I'm looking at their class. There's a bunch of receivers. There's a bunch of running backs. There's a bunch of corners. There's a bunch of everything outside of that nucleus on the inside. And that's where the difference is to me.
It's funny because you go back, this sucks, man. You go back 10, 15 years and it sucks that like I can do that. And it is still like within my adult lifetime, but Tyron Smith, Matthews, they had offensive linemen at one point that went through that program, but that has been where there's been the steepest decline. I think you're right.
Yeah, Pete Carroll, they had everything. Like that's I don't think they have that right now. So that's kind of how I'm looking at that. And it's I don't want to say steadily gone in one direction, but under Lincoln Riley, that's kind of what you're getting there. And the appeal is there too. Like you want to play in a high flying offense because you think that's what Lincoln Riley does. Yeah. Even though that's not really what we saw on Saturday. But it's still an appealing place. I mean, it's still USC. It's not going to change. And I think there was a question there, like USC's average is 91.24. If I'm going to take Jay's word as gospel here in the chat, and Penn State's 90.58. It's not that much different, but in those margins where you recruit in up front on both sides of the ball, that's kind of where it shows up. And that's where it showed up on Saturday, in my opinion.
Anything else? I know that there's more that you've written over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Your latest trimmings article goes to who might be the next Penn State football commit in the class of 2025. You don't have to talk about that, and people can go read it. That's the main thing. But are there other things that you want to discuss, or is there something that you found interesting doing your dive on that you want to share with people here today?
good stuff today. Who's next in 2025? We talk about some flip targets. We talk about some guys that have been on the radar like well before this that might be coming back into picture. Definitely check it out, blueoutostro.com. The other thing I think people have been asking about the impact of California recruiting. Look, State College is in a certain spot where California recruiting is going to be tough. Even the people that I talked to Madden Williams, who's great for a quote, like anytime you need it. One of my favorites in the class of 2026 because of that. No, it's a tough trip to make. Even if you're committed, even if you're Troy Hune, Penn State went down to see him. He went and saw the game. Even if you're Darius Dixon, he went to the game as well. It's tough to get out to State College. And because of that, you're not going to have a consistent performance recruiting there, even if you put some effort into it. Now, Penn State's got 2 commits. One's a legacy in LeVar, who is actually pretty good. And then you've got Dixon in the 2025 class. And then in 2026, you've got Hune, who is a quarterback. So it's a little bit different. Like you can recruit quarterbacks pretty much anywhere if you have the brand appeal. And I think Penn State's getting there, especially with the way that they've developed Drew Aller. They're starting to turn that corner that we've talked about so many times. But California is never going to be a place that Penn State, I think, just goes to and plucks guys out.
Gets what they want, right? Like goes in, identifies, gets what they want. I think that's a very fair point too. We already had a runway joke in the chat, which we need to, I think is a great segue to get Nate Bauer back onto the show. Let's talk about the game, Penn State USC. Do you want to start with the kicker, Nate, or do you want to start with just your general feelings about how this game played out on Saturday from a lot of different levels? The phrasing of the show is, was that a season-defining game, or did they just beat another team below them as they have throughout the last couple of years of James Franklin's tenure? So dealer's choice, whichever of those 2 questions you want to answer, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, USC's 3-3. Not that good. No, I'm kidding. No, I thought that there were a lot of, first of all, I'm reacting to fan sentiment. So the first thing that I saw was they started slow again. I disagree completely. I think that they started fast. I think that they immediately came out and shut down USC's offense. They forced a 4-and-out effectively, and then marched down the field and had a touchdown drive. That was, I didn't get a second look at it. I'm not going to debate, right? Maybe ticky-tack, maybe not.
His right arm was up, and that's why he got called. Like, it looked like he was engaging, even though the defensive back was engaging. It was like
this. It wasn't this. It was this, which is kind of a move to get around. But
it's just close enough where you're basically it's the Mighty Ducks flying V, right? They were just carving out a path where Warren was going to go in behind him. Didn't need contact. Like, that's the thing that I'm looking at. You didn't need to do it because the USC didn't do a very good job defending it. But no, I mean, I understand why it was called, even if we don't agree with it.
Yeah, I'm not, put it this way. It's not something that I'm super passionate about in either direction. That wasn't something that it was like, oh man, this is a horrible call or this is a great call. It just kind of was what it was. But I thought that the call, if that's a 7-0 game out of the gates, I'm not sure it proceeds the way that it eventually did the rest of the first, right? Because obviously Southern Cal got a boost of momentum from that, turned it around. And then really what I thought is the end around just knocked the wind out of Penn State. I mean, it was a total blindsider, right? That they just were not prepared for that. Obviously kind of got stuck in the mud there. And it was a great play, great play call, well executed. And to find themselves in that situation, I thought it took Penn State some time to steady themselves. But I also don't think that it was necessarily a horrible first half performance defensively, right? There was one other touchdown drive that Southern Cal had in the first half.
Yeah.
Obviously, right. So Penn State has that one play, 75 yards. The next is the 7-play, 89-yard touchdown drive, which is right.
With a broken play, by the way. And the way I phrased it in the first half is you have 2 explosive plays. One was a great play design. The other was a completely broken play that Penn State sniffed out, but Woody Marks just made a better play within the chaos. That led to 2 touchdowns. That was essentially the first half for USC. But I think that's what you're saying.
But yeah, but I guess my point is you follow it and you go into the second quarter and coming off of Aller's first interception, 4 plays minus 2 yards, field goal, right? But they were already in field goal position because of the interception. Next drive, 3 plays, 7 yards, punt. Next drive. And granted, USC was able to get points before the end of the half, but it held them to a field goal when it could have been worse. So I just thought that the defense managed to steady itself. And then you really saw offensively, Penn State just came alive in the second half in ways that it had not been able to in the first half. So I thought that there was.
What did you, Nate? I want to jump in here. What did you think of the first half versus the second half? I think Fitz and I talked about this in the post game. I called it biting around the edges of the defense, and they just dropped all the pretense and started attacking down the field in the second half. What did you think of that transition during halftime and the personality of the Penn State offense? And how it changed over the game. Well, I guess what are your thoughts on how you interpreted all of that?
I don't know. I guess I'm not sure exactly that it did. Right? That Penn State stalled on. There was a late first half drive that ended in a field. They moved the football in the first half, is my argument. Right? They weren't able to finish it off necessarily, but they were doing some things that were effective. It's just you got to finish it off, and they weren't able to do that. So then you get to the second half, and honestly, that play for Warren's touchdown is effectively the inverse of what USC did.
Trick play for trick play. Like they traded trickery in that.
And such a spectacular fashion, right? For Warren to make that play and make that catch, I thought put USC on its heels, and you saw that play out for really the rest of the game. I mean, you look at the drive chart, and yes, Aller's interceptions aside, or the one interception, I would say, touchdown, interception, field goal, touchdown, interception, field goal, and the last interception is garbage time. So that doesn't really count.
Fitz, go for it.
If you look at the drive chart, it's not trading score for score, which is good. Obviously, it's that complementary stuff that we talked about. So USC comes out, and of course they punt the first drive. Penn State, good first drive on defense, and then 2 straight touchdowns and a field goal. One at the field goal off the interception. But in response to those drives, it was punt, interception, punt, field goal for Penn State. So that's not ideal. But then they flipped it around and reverse the script in the second half, which is exactly what the complementary stuff that you're looking for. So it's very interesting how they didn't, there's been times when Penn State has had explosive plays and then they give up a touchdown. They didn't, it wasn't tick for tack. It was very, very complimentary in the way that they've been looking for a long time. And you saw in the third quarter, that was as close to we've seen since West Virginia, as them just kind of stepping on the neck of someone. And they did it. They were shorted a little bit in the fourth quarter, but they managed to recover and do it. So I was really impressed with the effort and the playing off of each other. And that's where special teams comes in, because Penn State did not have great field position in this game. Their average starting point was their own 28, but that's including a turnover. So I think that they did a really nice job in balancing those 3 things, which has been missing, I think, up to this point this season.
The thing I noticed, and this is what I was describing to you, Nate, is I thought it was visually different during the game, and then I checked the data. Here is Drew Aller's average depth of target in the first half versus the second half. I wrote about this, and I showed you the breakdowns during my film study, which went up yesterday afternoon at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. But there's just one stat from it that I thought is unbelievably telling here. In the first half, Drew Aller's average depth of target was 4.5 yards down the field. In the second half, 12.3. So they went from a dink and dunk offense, essentially screens, short passes, to, hey, let's just throw it down the field, which they had been doing all season long. So it seemed to me like that was the shift there. I do want to ask about, we led with the kicker in the graphic. Fitz, you're our special teams guy.
Before you get to that, it would have been so great if his average depth of target in the first half was 4.4 yards, because everything went to 44.
Yeah.
That's all my
So
head
close.
could think about. Yeah, that was very bad. It wasn't a joke. I just wish that would have come out as serendipitous as that. But Ryan Barker, man,
Yeah.
special teams. Again, USC won the field position battle, but it didn't end up being that big of a difference in the end because, Penn State was able to end drives with points. And I know it was not the ideal ending because Penn State got in the end zone, got it called back. They got close to the end zone. Barker hit some really short field goals, but the important thing, he hit them. He had bad angles. He was able to hit them. He came in. He was very cool. You see how much mental wear and tear is on these guys because Ryan Barker stepped in. He did not have what Sanders Sahadak had on his shoulders, and he was able to tap his foot, nod his head, put it right through. I mean, what his game winner was his worst kick, maybe, and that was not even close to missing. So
yeah,
really have to respect.
And the stone cold killer in him, the celebration afterwards, the no doubter. As much as I don't go in for vibes or things like that, just make the kick, and then that tells me what I need to know about you. But for a kicker, I think that does matter. You talk about how James Franklin called him like a jugs machine because it's always down the middle. There seems to be something there, Fitz, from that mentality perspective. This kicker does not have that flinch in him.
Absolutely. Now, there's more kicks to come. There's more big kicks to come, obviously. Right. But the body of work, it to me, it's very similar to Tyler Davis several years ago. I mean, he just came in. What did he do? He just made kicks. There's no pomp and circumstance around it or anything like that. He also doesn't have to kick off, which helps. There's a lot of things that help that go into that. He's got to focus on PATs and field goals. And for a left-footed kicker, it's not easy. But Riley Thompson holding that ball, Duzansky snapping that ball. I'm going to get my plugs in for the other specialists here. A great all-around performance for those guys. I know we've been looking at punt return. I know we've been looking at kick return and all that kind of stuff in terms of judging the overall efficiency of the special teams, but you got to make your kicks. Ryan Barker made his kicks. Huge hat tip to that guy because that was a really, really good experience coming through. I don't know that he's got the big range. You saw at the end of the game, Penn State maybe could have moved into a 55, 60 yarder. I don't think that was worth the risk in that situation because trajectory changes. You get a block, you get a return, something like that. You just don't want to deal with it. But no, I mean, I think he did a really nice job. And I also, again, said it on the post-game show, but Gabe Nwosu, outside of one kick that got way too close to going out of bounds, did his job, and the coverage team did their job. So you look at that field position battle where USC won, but you're not burned by it. And I think that's what it goes into, or that's what goes into my evaluation of that group, which is a big step forward from the first 5 weeks of the season.
Nate, what else stood out to you from the game that you think is interesting you want to talk about here?
I gotta go back to your depth of target just to interject.
Okay.
Right. The shape of the game, the personality of the game, I felt dictated that in a lot of ways, right? And this is something that I talked about during the game itself, but Penn State's offense is not designed to, in my opinion, come back from 21 points in a half. They just, I think that would have been out of reach had it gotten to that point. Whereas they, some of the running issues, some of the things that you saw in terms of not necessarily the yards per carry stuff, but how often they were going to the pass versus the run in the second half, I just thought it was a circumstantial thing, right? Based on the fact that they were trailing and had to make up ground and do it quickly. I don't know that Andy Kotelnicki would prefer that, but maybe there's a lesson here for Penn State on the backside of it, that they can be that's the passing offense.
Yeah,
they can be. But I just, and this is for broader conversation and maybe for you, is targeting Tyler Warren 17 times. And you saw receivers make big plays at the end of the game. But to me, it's like the trickeration, all of that stuff, you're hiding something. Right? There's
I was confused by the first half game plan. It felt like Penn State, of the two teams, it felt much more like Penn State was afraid of its offensive line as opposed to USC. So 4 screen passes in the first half out of 7 that they threw in the entire game. in the first 2 quarters. So they're, like misdirection, speed options to the outside. They ran a lot of outside zone. I don't know all of the decisions and what they saw. They ran a lot of stuff into the boundary, the short side of the field. There were decisions in there that I wasn't expecting. I did think that they were going to have a catch and run offense based on, what USC does and some of the things that we saw early in the week and some of my opinions about the players that can make plays in this game. But then they stopped targeting those routes. And I think you make a fair point. Game flow does dictate that. If it's an even game, maybe they have a different game plan. But I think it's very clear the game plan was not working to their liking in the first half, because James Franklin at halftime said, we need to get more explosive plays. We're going to get that done. And then they come out and start throwing 10 yards further down the field.
Yeah. He also said that he needed to stop USC on third downs, and they were 0 for 4 at third down at that point. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Let's talk about the run game, though. Let's talk about the run game with the way it performed against a team that a lot of teams have run on this year. That defensive line, that front seven in general, and the way that they play their defense with as many, 2 high safety looks. Fitz, were you surprised that they didn't have more success on the ground?
I was surprised, given Nick's status, and I think we can all agree limited in that situation. Mm-hmm. I think that played a lot into it, because if you look at the yards that USC has given up this year, and this was, I think, something you highlighted this week, a lot of the yards that they've given up were on big runs. Like from a down-to-down basis, if they can avoid the big run, they were okay. Did a lot of slanting, did a lot of filling behind the slant and things like that. It was very successful against Penn State this week. You look, Nick and Katron each had their longest run on the first run of the game, and then it was basically a drought. Like you had very little. I think Nick had 8 of his 10 runs were 2 yards or fewer, and that's not, you can be you can be that guy, but those other 2 carries have to go for 30, 40 yards, because that's what you expect from an explosive player. We had the conversation with Saquon a couple of months ago on that. I think there's concern there. I think that you look at the last couple of weeks, the explosive plays are not there in the run game. Some decent chunks here and there, but what we expected has not come away. And against teams that the stats aren't great, like the defensive stats are not great. So I think there's reason for question. I don't want to say concern gets people all riled up, but I think there's reason for questions as to why this isn't functioning as properly as maybe they drew it up to. And again, you throw for 391 yards, there's going to be some give and take, but I didn't think there would be that much give in the running game.
Yeah, agreed. Nate, last point, and then we'll get to the mailbag.
Yeah, they have not had a run from the running backs go for more than 18 yards. Not any run more than 18 yards since Bowling Green.
That feels highly familiar to 2022, doesn't it? Yeah. Where they made a lot of hay early in the non-conference season, a couple of select runs against Auburn, and then it was hit or miss after that.
Yeah, it's I'll say it. It's problematic. that is an issue for Penn State. I think that the difference this year, and something that bodes well for its correction, is, well, look, if you are an opposing defensive coordinator, who are you going to make beat you before this game, right? If in terms of body of work, if you have to pick your poison, which one are you picking? You're going to pick Drew Aller, right? You're going to make those receivers, make that quarterback make those plays to beat you, because you don't want Nick Singleton and Katron Allen to run all over you. And so I think the fact that Aller and the receivers and that the whole passing operation were able to prove themselves in that moment and do what was necessary to win that game maybe changes that dynamic a little bit moving forward into the rest of the season. But I would imagine you're still going to see the same choices being made, right? It's just to me a matter of, and this is a point from last year, just redone, but you're only going to get a couple shots. You're like, if you're Nick Singleton and you're Katron Allen, you're only going to get a couple looks at it a game. You got to make the most of it. And as you guys pointed out, Katron had one that, just, it just didn't work out. He tripped, but like, those are the things that
he had more than one, honestly. Okay. Right. You're killing me, because this is a great topic to dig in on. I'll save all of my thoughts for tomorrow's show because I want to get to the BWI mailbag. We actually have time this week because we don't have James Franklin's press conference to dig into. And I every week I promise we're going to get to a bunch of questions, and then we don't get to a bunch of questions. But Nate, you make some great points, and I think there are some structural things in the offense that initially didn't matter and are starting to show up now. That is a professional tease, which is unprofessional when you point it out. So let's get to the mailbag. We're going to start with this one for Fitz. It is a great question from Poncho570. He says, Sean, I'm very late in asking this, but how did the ceremony for your father-in-law or your father at his alma mater go? Guessing, and then the second question is guessing there'll be a D-squad scrimmage this week. 3 to 5 players you'd like to hear about now that we're halfway through the season.
Well, first off, thanks for asking on Dad. It was awesome. He was... since he's become a grandfather, he's become a crier. So he has started with that stuff. And it was a really special weekend for him. So thank you for asking. There was a ceremony that I missed, and he came up and tailgated in between it, which was insane. But a ceremony that I missed that a lot of great things were said about that. And I'm really proud of hearing that one. So thank you for asking. D-squad scrimmage this week. We kind of mentioned it earlier in this show, but Ethan Grunkmeyer is, like, if that's a focus, you have to figure out what's going to come after this season, because you have a harsh reality that quarterback may leave after this season. So Bo, I think you know what you got with Bo, but what do you have with Grunk? And is he close enough to push Bo in the spring if Drew's not here? Then you've got the Smolik stuff that goes back into it. Smolik's not practicing. He's not doing anything that would, take place in this scrimmage, but this is a big opportunity for Ethan Grunkmeyer. Like, you look at how this sort of comes together, and then you take 2025 into account with Beckham Kritza, and this is a nice little window for a guy to step in if he can be that guy. Is he there yet? I don't think so, but we've heard some nice things there. The receivers would have loved to see what Peter Gonzalez could do this year, but he's going to miss the year. So you look at Tysier Denmark. How does he fit in? You hear some good things about Josiah Brown, but you're not expecting him to be close to going based on his injury history and based on him needing to get bigger and stronger and things like that. And then,
his overall development too, right?
Yeah. I mean, this was not even if to me, even if he doesn't get hurt last year, he's not playing this year. Like, that's kind of where
he was kind of a long-term
developmental type guy. Yeah. Egan Boyer, continue to hear good things about him. He keeps going on the trips, and I don't want to say he's one of those guys that can help you out down the stretch, because he is still a freshman. He's still skinny. He's still a lot of things, but maybe he's a guy that gets a couple snaps here and there. You never know. Like, they still want to redshirt him, but at the same time, he's close. Like, he's so much closer to that line than I think anybody thought he would be, because he's a developmental project, because he's a high athletic, high upside type guy who doesn't look anything like he's going to look probably at this time next year. But I think Egan Boyer's certainly one to watch. Defensively, I mentioned those 3 defensive tackles. We just haven't heard anything on them based on their injury situation. And, you'd like to hear, what DeAndre Cook's up to. Liam Andrews has been in the spotlight, but he hasn't been a guy that's really played at all. So that's where I'm going with that. And then just keep the linebackers healthy. For God's sake, keep the linebackers healthy, because I don't know how many more times I can talk about the depth there. And an interesting one on the travel squad this week, John Mitchell, the cornerback. Belgrave Schroeder, of course, moved over to safety. Kenny Wosley was the one that we heard through camp and through the first part of the season was doing some things. But to see John Mitchell out there on the travel squad, I think that's a positive there. So those are just a few freshmen that hop into play. Again, it's very different this week for freshmen, as opposed to here's the placard where you're running USC's offense, USC's defense. Now you can run Penn State's offense and see how you kind of fit, and see if maybe during the back half of the season you can work your way onto the field.
Nate, I'm going to come to you with this question from Bruno Sultanum. He says, not looking for excuses here because Penn State won, but how much do you think the travel impacted the game? Did you notice any slowdown or general lack of execution that is not normal for Penn State, which could be because of travel? I think this is a way of not saying slow start with also trying to say slow start. Was there anything you noticed from lethargy or just a general effort's always the wrong word, but anything like that from the Penn State offense or defense or general vibe about them as they took the field on Saturday?
No.
Okay. Cool.
I think that two things. One, obviously after practice, we will get James Franklin, and so it will be interesting to hear if he says anything about that. But generally speaking, I think they were happy with their plan to go out on Thursday. I don't think that there were any issues as far as I'm aware. They were able to travel back into State College on Saturday night, overnight, obviously. So, but on the front end, they practiced on Friday at SoFi Stadium. I just don't think that there were really, as these things go, it's one of those deals where it's like, hey, if you have to travel across the country, it will, some stuff, there will be imperceptible or perceptible, some effects from that, but you have to make the most of it to the best of your ability. And it's about maximizing or getting as close to that line of having no impact whatsoever as you possibly can. And my sense is not that it played a role in how that first half went. I am firmly in the camp of Lincoln Riley called a great play. It was really excellently executed, and it just threw them off. And it took a minute to get the wind back under their sails.
This one we've talked a little bit about on the show, but Nate, I'm going to come back to you on this one for your personal view at the game. Both Donko and Singleton, Anthony Donko, Nick Singleton, hampered by injuries lingering during the USC game. They were not as effective in this game. What were your thoughts on that from OC Lion on the Blue White Illustrated message board?
Yeah, just flatly, I'm not really zeroing in on, I'm a watch the ball guy, right? So like Anthony Donko is not something in the course of the game that I'm really focused on. I think that T. Frank, you watching the film afterwards and studying it probably have a better perspective on that. Nick, one, his usage was different in the first place.
The fact that they played Quentin Martin, I think, is a clear indicator.
Yeah. So look, like it's one of those deals where I felt like in the moment leading into the UCLA game, there was some very purposeful downplaying of what it was and how it was impacting him, right? Him missing a practice. Like, it's not just happenstance, right? Nick Singleton doesn't miss practice. Otherwise, it wasn't a veteran rest day. He got banged up. He got banged up against Illinois, and it is playing itself out again. The fact that they have this week off could not come at a better time for him and a bunch of guys that have stuff, whether you see, right, whether or not you're wrapped or bandaged or braced or anything, that's immaterial. A lot of these guys have stuff going on that can only get better with some time and some treatment. And now they have the time to do that treatment. So
the conversation around Tony Rojas, total tangent here, is so frustrating because I'm fairly certain, we've had this conversation, I'm fairly certain he's dealing with some sort of injury that prevents him from using half of his body. So when people say he's a better Sam linebacker because he's better in coverage than he is against, he's not a thumper. I'm like, how can you be a thumper when I watched him after he took contact with one of his arms, basically like hold his arm and then go play the next play? I don't know how we can just have that. And this goes into the whole conversation about James Franklin not talking about injuries is what's the curve here?
Correct.
What is the acceptable level of criticism of a player? And Fitz said this earlier. Anthony Donko played that game essentially with one arm. You watch the way that he was able to engage, I think it was with his inside arm when he got into some blocks with Wormley. Looked like the same guy. Having to go the other way, he can't control anybody with that other arm because he got injured. So, sorry. That's just a frustrating tangent when it comes to evaluation of players. That always happens, and I never know what to do with it because I see one thing, and then I feel like I'm on an island here with these thoughts and opinions. But
the important thing is to pay attention, and anything else that you believe it is, believe that is instead of what Nate says, because that's what he went with a couple of weeks ago. It's just and Nate miraculously had that story of him missing practice 2 minutes after we left practice. He's a very fast writer, so Listen to the guy.
Stop. Just stop. But listen. One thing.
Stop,
also-
but we're
but
not
also.
going to stop.
One thing that I this is just the stuff that sticks out to me and gives me some inside baseball level of delight. But when James Franklin says, and he's repeated it now 2 or 3 times, when he says, well, I can't have it both ways, where I don't talk about injuries on the front side, and so I can't use them as excuses on the backside. That's him acknowledging on the back, right? That is him having it both ways, because every time that he says that, he is signaling very loudly, whether anybody picks it up or not, this is me saying that this is what's happening. Is he's saying, yeah, they are backed up. There are a lot of players playing through something that what would my preference be? Because I think it undercuts his players, right? I think that his policy, I get it. I understand why he does it from a competitive advantage point of view, but I think it undersells the reality of, if you knew that Tony Rojas was playing through something and it was bad, it changes the criticism for sure, but it also changes, like, it flips the script from criticism to praise. And that's what a lot of these guys should be getting is, hey, not only are they not playing poorly, but they are maximizing what they can possibly give to this team through circumstances that are so far from ideal that they should be given credit for that. And I think it's a little bit of a
back
shame.
to the KJ Winston injury, where he tried to do that, and then it was just obvious within one play that he was so far below what he needed to be that he couldn't really be effective the same way. I want to move on to this question. Fitz, I'm going to send this to you, but I'm also going to interject and give my opinion to start, because I've been wanting to scream about this. Player you think has made the biggest strides so far this season. Why is it Elliot Washington? And is that your opinion?
Elliot Washington and Zion Tracy were 5 and 6 on the corner depth chart to start the season, and it's just a testament to how deep and talented that room is, because we got a question earlier that said, hey, have these guys replaced Kimber and I forget who the other one specifically in the comment was, but no, like Jalen Kimber led the group in stats. Penn State's outside corners, with the exception of AJ Harris's failed jam on the touchdown slam, were excellent on Saturday. Like you didn't see them, and that's the best possible thing, Elliot Washington is playing outside. Zion Tracy has moved to a lionish nickel type role, along with Cam Miller, where they're playing the slot, which is a harder position to play. I mean, no disrespect to the outside guys, but it's very hard to play slot corner, and they've done a very good job. So I'm very encouraged with Washington's progress on the outside, which has allowed them to get Tracy, get Miller in there. Miller, I think it's very easy to bag on Miller. He hasn't played terribly as you think he has. Like I saw people. It was after the drag route where he's asked to cover someone, a USC receiver, from all the way across the field and basically stay on his hip the entire way. And he was pretty close. He wasn't there. That's an incredibly hard thing to do. Now, I don't think that he stood out in the way that Elliot Washington has. Washington has upped his game, from, I think he was number 5 coming out of camp to where he's at now. Like, he's done that because of the stuff that he's done in the game. Like, you look at the interception earlier this year, he's worked his way into that position. And Elliot Washington was my answer when I saw this question right away, just because of how far he's come and how many things he's sort of overcome, not in the adversity sense, but in the traffic ahead of him sense. He's done a really great job.
Yeah. And his ascent has allowed them to unlock certain things. I wrote about this, the ideal scenario of how to replace a guy like KJ Winston to be able to play more physical guys in the slot. AJ Harris is playing in the slot on third down. He is their dime corner now, where before you had both Tracy and Miller because you needed AJ Harris on the outside. But now with Elliot Washington, they can get more physical guys on the interior, and I think that's super important. MDG, the numbers here says Kimber played 54 snaps, Harris 47, Tracy 31, Miller 32. I don't want to verify. I'm trying to verify. I don't think AJ Harris played any snaps at safety. I did not see that, but I also can't say for certain that happened. I know that they did bring in Dejan Lane at one point, but I don't remember AJ Harris playing any snaps at
Yeah.
safety.
I think he played kind of that lionish type role. And you know, he's a nickel spot, to be honest
Yeah,
with you.
and
There's a lot
any
of
nickel
gray
player
area.
can drop into a safety role. That doesn't mean you're playing safety. You're playing
Correct.
a dime, and you're rotating into that coverage.
Correct. And Dejon Lane played 2 snaps, which kind of reflects on how the trust aspect plays in when you play a game like this. Like,
Yeah.
I understand that the talent is there and the athleticism is there, but you're throwing live bullets at a true freshman. Maybe he's not ready for it. So I think that kind of tells you kind of blueprints how you're looking to mesh the corners and the safeties and be corner heavy because those guys are experienced.
Do you think they get there? Have they found a good middle ground? Do you think they get there where Lane plays more and Reed plays more towards the line position? There was a question that I didn't have time to cut for the show that kind of dealt with that idea of, do they get to a place where Jalen Reed can go back to the line, and do they need to this year? I apologize. I know I asked you this after the game, but it's just a reoccurring theme here.
Yeah, I think the snap count says a lot here with Lane. Like, you're just not ready, not comfortable enough to be in that situation yet, and that's fine. He's a true freshman. I get it. So yes and no. It depends on the opponent to me, and maybe you get away with that in some instances, and they have the last couple of weeks. But you go to USC, you want your best experienced guys in the field, and I think that's the product of what you saw there.
Yeah, and they play pure spread 3 receiver sets, so you want corners out there probably anyway. Nate, I need to come back to you for a James Franklin decoder ring here, as Stephen Light put it. This particular conversation, with all the technology that is allowed on the sidelines, like iPads, why does it take a halftime for the defense to shut down the opponent's offense? James Franklin talked about the iPads and the technology on the sideline this offseason as something that was a big deal. And since then, people have asked him about it, and he has kind of downplayed it. So I'm curious what you think that means. And I can see you off screen that you don't necessarily agree with my assessment of that. So I'm just going to let you go here.
No, I don't think I disagree with your assessment. I think I disagree with the question.
Oh, okay.
They did shut down USC's offense after, right from the second quarter on.
After the touchdown. Yeah.
After the second touchdown. And look, again, the first touchdown, it's not as though those yards don't exist or that play didn't exist. It does, right? So I can't just like subtract them from the total, but exceptional plays happen sometimes, but it's a one-off. It's a one thing that happened. But if you look at USC's offensive efficiency after that first play, it changes things. It's not.
Let's all get on the same page. I'm going to put up we're referencing the drive chart. Here's the drive chart so that everyone sees what we're talking about. So USC is over here. And what Nate is saying is, after those first 2 touchdowns, they did not really get anything other than this 49-yard field goal attempt as a scoring opportunity in this game.
Yeah. It's the crutch of the halftime adjustment is coming back up here. Like, that is the easy, almost lazy take on it. Like that only things can change at halftime. And that's what they've been doing this year, just because their third quarter defense has been so spectacular. I mean, there's nothing short of spectacular here. Like, those changes come throughout the game. It's not just a halftime, hey, we're going to change into this coverage and change into this. It is a building of events there. So I think that's what it comes down to, is not just the halftime adjustment. The iPads, and Sal Wormley had a really good answer to this when I asked him after the West Virginia game. He's like, there's only so much time that you can devote to that, because if you tinker too much, or if you change your defensive philosophy based on a sideline visit or a sideline meeting on your iPad, like, you're going to essentially put yourself to behind for the next drive. Like that. That's what you're looking at. So there's a certain amount of time to be spent here. There's a certain amount of brain power to be spent on how to fix it versus how to patch it, I think is how you look at it. So I think Penn State's done a pretty good job of that. They got to do something better at the start. Like, we got to figure out a different way to define this, because Penn State started fairly fast.
A complete first half, I think, is what you're looking for.
The scripted part of the game, like, is great. And then, things evolve and changes are made, and that's when Penn State slowed down. So it's not like they didn't start fast, but they came back around. So we got to figure out a way to define that differently. T. Frank, that's on your plate this week. Figure that out.
Got it.
But those adjustments come along, and it's not just hey, you need to be here. It's here's what they're trying to do from a concept perspective. here's how we have to use our concepts to stop that, because it's not just, hey, they're running a screen here, so we got to do better. And when the lineman goes out, we got to stay with them for a screen. Like, that's not how that works. It's more the concept of what they're trying to do. And USC, again, had a very good game plan to coach around their offensive line, to take advantage of the over aggressiveness of Penn State's front seven, which they did very well. And then all of a sudden, Penn State was like, hey, why don't we hold off a little bit, put our defensive lineman in a better spot and become gap sound. And that's what, like, it's so simple. You talk about the Michigan game a couple of years ago, gap soundness came out of that, and people are just like, well, that's not what it is. It's got to be tough tackling and form
size.
It's got to be in the right spot. And you saw in the first half on those two great drive, the touchdown drive, or the touchdown one play drive, and then the great drive afterwards, that Penn State's linebackers were out of sorts and they were in the wrong position. And that is gap soundness. That is where you need to be. That comes back on that second level. People are going to say the defensive line didn't play great this week. I disagree. Once again, I think it's one of those things, like we're doing with the defensive line what we always do with the offensive line, is the snap judgment is, hey, they ran for a bunch of yards, so the defensive line must be bad. It's not really what happened again on Saturday.
There's this here from Jared, who says, remember, USC has them. They make adjustments too. They also come in with good game plans, knowing Penn State's tendencies. And this is something I broke down in the film study, is they found a clear trend that I've been not pointing out, but saying on the message board, like, hey, this is what Penn State does all the time, and somebody finally attacked it. So if you want to learn more about that and Penn State's zone dropping tendencies, go check that out on the message board. Speaking of, we're out of time. So Nate Bauer, get us out of here on something that you're thinking about this week that you're going to be writing about at bluewhiteillustrated.com, that fans can go and continue this conversation with you, because as always, you are the star of the chat.
Yeah, I don't want to do that. I want to talk about Woody Marks. Like, did you guys see him? He was really good.
Yeah.
He was really good.
Like, sometimes I feel like that gets lost in the conversation and I understand why everything is Penn State centric. Obviously it's Penn State centric, but also I do think it is a valid exercise for fans to take themselves out of that fan hat for a second and just recognize very good football players. And USC has very good football players. I understand. Right, like all of the chess piece, like that side of things is a valid and fun conversation to have. But also, I think a lot of times it gets overlooked. Like, hey, Woody Marks was just really good. That's a really good football. That's a really good football player, and he had a really good day on Saturday. That's it. I'm done.
All right, and with that, we're going to be done. We'll continue this conversation tomorrow on some of those things. Fitz, what do you got?
I have a really good football player that had a really good day. Zane Durant. We do not talk enough about Zane Durant. He is awesome. He is absolutely awesome. I know that, the rushing stats are going to be reflected on the defensive tackles, because that's what's drilled into our brain. Zane Durant's an awesome player. I can't wait to see more of Zane Durant playing football.
Agreed. And you use a great phrase. The defensive line was not bad. Did certain players have bad days on the defensive line? Yes, but overall, you denied Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant, the stars came to play, and they all helped Penn State win that game. You can continue that conversation with us tomorrow. Greg and I are going to continue that. We're going to look at some of those things, maybe some season-long trends from Penn State. Still working out what we're going to do, but we're going to be talking about Penn State football, because that's what we do here on the BWI Live Show. As always, please subscribe, because we are so close to 15,000 subscribers, which is a big deal to me until we get to 15,001, and then the march to 16,000 happens, because I know there are even more people that are crazy about Penn State football that want a daily dose of this, and we're going to give you as close to a daily dose as we can here at Blue White Illustrated. Thank you to these guys, and if you do want that daily dose, bluewhiteillustrated.com. Subscribe. There's no reason not to do it. We'll be back tomorrow with more Penn State football conversation. See you then.